Knock. Welcome, all of you. I'm Warren Clark, the head of Churches for Middle East Peace. We're very proud to be one of the co-sponsors with the Foundation for Middle East Peace and the Holy Land Rabbinical Foundation for a conference by Dr. Bernard Sabella. Dr. Sabella is professor of sociology in Bethlehem University on the West Bank. He is an elected member of the Palestinian Legislative Council. He lives in East Jerusalem. He has worked closely with Jewish and Muslim colleagues in Israeli and Palestinian textbook research, as well as different members of their communities. As a Catholic, he was invited by the Holy See to participate in the Catholic Islamic Liaison meeting in the Vatican in 2004. He holds a PhD in sociology from the University of Virginia. Dr. Sabella.
It's a pleasure to be here, and I'd like to thank Georgetown, and I'd like to thank CIMET and the foundation and HCF for their invitation, for their hospitality, for really being very warm. It's wonderful. You know, the more I get closer to Washington, I was in Seattle, Washington for a conference prior to coming here. And I think the more I get closer to here, the more I think people here are more open to the work. I think so. Because when I arrived at Seattle, the passport control officer looked at my passport and, you know, and said, "What are you?" And I said, "Well, I'm a Palestinian." "Oh," and I said, "By the way, I'm a Roman Catholic." He said, "What do you mean, Palestinian and Roman Catholic? There's no such thing. It's like you are telling me, if you come, it's like a Russian coming here and I ask him, 'What are you?' And then he says, 'I'm a Hindu or a Buddhist.' And I can't add it up. I said, well, precisely because of that, I'm coming here. And I want to try and make things, I mean, better understood by some people, because I'm sure there are many people who know everything, like back home. But basically, when we look at Palestinian Christians, I always prefer to put Palestinian Christians in context. Meaning that Palestinian Christians are part and parcel of the Arab-Palestinian society. Many people tend to forget that when you talk about the Middle East is not that, you know, simplistic place. It's not that you just say Muslim, Jew, Christian, non-Christian. It's not that simple. For example, I was one time in a conference with Sami Smuha, who is an Iraqi Jew, Israeli, at the University of Haifa. And then he introduced himself as an Arab Jew. And I told him, "What do you mean Arab Jew? You know, don't we have enough confusion with introducing ourselves as Arab Christians? And you are saying Arab Jew." And he made the point. He said, basically, if you look back at Iraq's history, especially the nationalist part of it in the 30s and 40s, was built up by Jews, Christians, Muslims, working on the nationalist, communist, leftist groups that were emerging. So he is correct in saying that you know, he's an Arab Jew. Now, some people say, but you Palestinian Christians are facing a particular problem. If you look at the Middle East today, the Christian population, you would see that out of the 13 to 15 million Arab Christians, for example, in Egypt you have between 8 to 12 million Copts. In Lebanon you have 1.5 million Christians approximately. In Syria you have over 1 million Christians, and so on. In Jordan around 200,000 Christians. Now when you come to the Palestinian territories and Israel, you get 50,000 Christians in the West Bank, and you get 110,000 in Israel. Actually, some people are telling me that the figure quoted of 50,000 in the West Bank is exaggerated, that it is much lower than that. And then 2/3 of Palestinian Christians are abroad, are in the diaspora. Actually, I think Prince Hassan at one point said, Prince Hassan of Jordan at one point said that there are more Palestinian Christians from Jerusalem in Sydney, Australia, than in the old city of Jerusalem. And I can't believe that. I can't believe that. Because Daphne Simhoni, who is an Israeli author on Christianity in the Holy Land, she has almost a classic book, really a classic book on Christianity, puts the figure of Palestinian Christians in Jerusalem back in 1945 somewhere at around 30,000. Today in Jerusalem, you don't have 8,000 indigenous Palestinian Christians. So we are leaving the Holy Land. Now we come to the question, why? And here you get all kinds, you get really not all kinds, you get really two arguments. The one argument that is sometimes presented, often presented, is that, Palestinian Christians are leaving because of Muslim persecution. Now, my response to that is that true, there are changes, there are differences taking place in our environment. Islam has become a political ideology, and therefore it has colored and has impacted the relations between Muslims, a majority of Muslims, and the Christian minority. But religion as such and the sensitivities here and there as such are not a reason to leave. And again in various surveys I have conducted myself, we have come to the conclusion, not I, but the people who have been asked, the Christian Palestinians, have said again and again it was really the political and economic situation that leads to their emigration and that get them to thinking about emigration. And it is not religious fanaticism as such, even though in the latest survey I had 8% saying, of the respondents saying that religious fanaticism could be a reason, while almost 50% were saying political, and almost a high percentage saying economic. So Philip Farr, who is an author on Palestinian Christians, on Arab Christians, argues in some of his articles that the reason that drives Palestinian and Arab Christians to leave in most Arab countries, I'm not talking about Iraq specifically because this article was written before Iraq, basically leave for the same reason that Muslims leave, for the same reason that Jews leave, by the way. You think that Israel is a haven for the Jewish people. I have a Jewish friend of mine from Berlin who has a very senior position in one of the state governments there. And I met her about a couple of months back in Jerusalem, and she told me You go in Berlin and you see there almost 60,000 young Israelis. You see them all over in Berlin. And it doesn't need a magician to say, to say that the reason for their leaving is primarily political and economic. In other words, if the political and economic situation does not improve, then we are definitely going to lose our youngest and brightest brains. And it's not that we are not worried about the not so young and not so bright who leave also, but it is very important. It is very important to keep promising young people there. Now, I like to stress that that the way out is not through a religious solution. I know the Pope was here last week, so I cannot say anything more about the religious equation. But really, religion is not the answer. Some people would be upset. I mean, well, what do you mean religion is not the answer? I mean, I'm a Roman Catholic. I hope practicing Roman Catholic, you know, and I believe. But why do I say religion is not the answer? Basically because I'm worried that there are some, especially in this country, who like to project always a religious interpretation to events back in the Middle East. And by doing so, they are really making life, specifically for Christians, even more difficult. And I can't, in this forum, but say that. For example, evangelicals, with all due respect, and I know some people may not agree with me, but evangelicals who stress that we need to proselytize Muslims, you know, are doing us a great harm. And I know some people will say, well, Bernard, stay off this because that is controversial. But at the same time, we cannot really jeopardize our existence as Christian communities in the Middle East by having simply groups that want to convert Muslims. Jews, Muslims, and Christians back in the Middle East have come, most of us, not all of us, but we have come to a position of saying we do not proselytize each other. Now, I attended the Asia Synod in the Vatican in 1997. And it was clear that the Catholic Church also is a proselytizing church. And there was a discussion. Almost every Catholic bishop that spoke from Asia spoke about the need of spreading the faith. Now, one Arab clergyman stood up and said, we too want to spread the faith in the Middle East, but we do it through our model, through our schools, through our hospitals, through doing service, rather than telling people, shoving the Bible down their throat, you know. I mean, excuse my language, you know, but I mean, you know, sometimes this gets really a counter effect, and therefore we are all in deep trouble. Now, do I think, I go back to the theme, do I think the answer is religion? I think it is very important not to downplay religion as I just did, okay? Because we can and could work together in religious communities to strengthen relationships and to give models. Some of you may have heard of the Interreligious Council that was just set up in the Holy Land between the two chief rabbis, the Muslim judge, religious sheikh, Sheikh Tamimi, and 3 or 4 of the heads of the Christian churches there. I think it's a good start, and I think we should encourage that. But being done, and hopefully will continue to be done, I think we need also to push for an overall political situation. And the overall political situation means that, irrespective of where you stand with the present administration, I think what President Bush is trying to do now is to get Palestinians and Israelis forward in the peace process. And I think we should support that. And we should really support it and make sure that Palestinians and Israelis will, by the end of this year, come to a peaceful agreement between the two of them. Because this is where I think we will have a chance. Everybody, not simply the Christian communities, but I think Jewish young Israelis, young Muslims, and everybody. If we do not succeed in the peace process by the end of the year, I think the painting I hear in Ramallah of what the scenario I hear in Ramallah of what is going to happen is really very bad. And likewise on the Israeli side. We can get the right wing in Israel, and we can get Hamas on our side, and therefore we are into a more confrontationist period in the next 4 years. Some people ask me if any of the presidential hopefuls would make a difference, and I say honestly, I'm not following the presidential elections. I used to follow them 20 years ago. I have given up on the US administrations when it comes to the Middle East, especially to the Arab-Israeli conflict. And it is a very realistic assessment and not a hype-up. And that is why I stress that we need to move on the peace process now. Any breakthrough in the peace process now will bring not simply Palestinian Christians, but all of us in there some hope for the future. And the most important thing is to get our young people to stay and to say, this is our home, this is where we're going to make the future. And if you can help us in this, that would be great. Thank you. So questions, answers, I'm ready. Yeah.
Dr. Sabella, and David Mack from the Middle East Institute. Since you're teaching on the faculty at Bethlehem University and you're living in Jerusalem, could you talk a little bit about the problems of moving back and forth between those two cities? Not only personal problems that you may have, but what ordinary people who may want to go back and forth for reasons of faith or jobs or seeing family, education, what kind of problems are involved?
Well, basically, I have, and I express that to even Israeli colleagues. So I'm not what I'm saying here. I say back home. If I'm a pilgrim coming to Bethlehem, and a Jewish pilgrim coming to Bethlehem, and I see the wall, my first impression of that wall is really disastrous. I say, this is not possible. Even a Ministry of Tourism, Israeli Ministry of Tourism person with whom I was sharing a panel discussion was saying that the way the checkpoint is built in Bethlehem was built specifically only for laborers, Palestinian laborers to come through, not for pilgrims, not for tourists. That is if you go walking, because it's a long maze and, it's really problematic. But also, I think the practical problem of the wall in Bethlehem is that contrary to Ramallah, I don't know if some of you know the situation there, but if I want to go to Ramallah, I can enter Ramallah freely. Why? Even if I have an Israeli ID, even if I have an Israeli license plate. But why can I enter Ramallah freely? Because there is an Arab population that is continuous between North Jerusalem and Ramallah. So there is no sense in stopping every car that would want to go to Ramallah. Now the situation is different with Bethlehem. You have you have the East Jerusalem, you have a Jewish neighborhood on the way to Bethlehem, and then you come to Bethlehem and there is no Arab residential contiguity. So every time you want to go to Bethlehem, you need to show proof either of residency in Bethlehem, or that you are working in Bethlehem, or that you are working with an international organization in order to have access to Bethlehem. Likewise, you cannot from Bethlehem access to Jerusalem freely. So the end result of all this is that the local population, both Muslims and Christians, feel that they are imprisoned in that wall. And most important, goods and commerce is not forthcoming. And therefore, when you don't have good business, what do? You start saying, I'm going to pick up and leave. And sometimes, even if you have good business, as these days, because we have lots of tourists and pilgrims coming to Israel and the Palestinian territories, and therefore business is picking up. And people are happy. But yet, even with that, there are some young people who say, okay, if I make money and I don't have the ability to move around, then maybe I should go to greener pastures, so to speak, where I can be free.
Yes, my name is Anton Ajar. My question is this: do you think that there is a special role for the Christian community in the peace process, let me say in terms of liberation, in the manner of Martin Luther King's nonviolent resistance, that's special or unique to the Christian community there?
Well, you know, we are less than 1.5% of the population. And yet we have schools. We have almost 30 to 40% of the faculty members at Birzeit and Bethlehem universities who are Christians, and so on. But we are not really a national church like in Egypt or in Lebanon. Therefore, our influence should not be exaggerated. People often in the West particularly say, you Palestinian Christians are different. You can be a bridge. I mean, there are also Muslim Palestinians who are different, and they can be a bridge too. But they point to us and say, you can be a bridge, and you can really work with both Jews and Muslims. and yet, you know, yes, even if we can, we are still limited. But we will not be able. For example, in the Seattle conference, Sami Awad from Holy Land Trust was talking all the time about nonviolence. And he said that, we meet with Israelis, we meet with Muslims, we bring them all together, we do training on nonviolence, and even they bring in young Americans back home to be trained on nonviolence. But this remains limited, because in my opinion, the real challenge is to get to a political agreement. Correct that Palestinian Christians tend to be educated more, and I'm not saying, don't misunderstand me, I'm not saying that Palestinian Muslims tend to be educated more in violence. But what I would say is the school system among the Christian community is more open to, a Western style understanding of the word. And therefore, you tend to say that we can have other alternatives rather than confrontation. Now, on both the Israeli and Palestinian side, you get also people, as Sami Awad said, you get also people on both sides that are violent, you know. And I can give you stories of settlers, even Orthodox Jews in Jerusalem, that have shown a lot of violence. And likewise, we have Muslims and some Christians as well who opt for violence. But we cannot, as churches, say, let's pick up and have a leader who will really lead all of us. It's more likely if this would come from a Muslim leader that we would have more influence. But still, our influence is there, but should not be exaggerated. Yeah.
Ray Gordon, Baltimore, Maryland. When I read comments from people on the ground in the Holy Land, the Christian mayor of Bethlehem, the group Open Bethlehem, the Latin patriarch Michael Sabella of the Holy Land, all point to Israel as the problem of what's destroying the Christian community there. The apartheid wall, the checkpoints and roadblocks, the illegal expansion of settlements out of East Jerusalem. The problem is the United States is the only country really that can change anything there. But because the Israel lobby has total control not only of our government, but of our media, only Israel's side ever gets presented to the American people. So my question is, how do we involve the Christian community? As a Catholic, I write to my bishops, I send them videos, say, please look at this. Let's get the Catholic Church involved. But it just seems like the Catholic and Christian churches won't make that connection or are afraid to criticize Israel in this country. So how do you see that?
Well, I like to be more practical and say the following. That I think it is the obligation of people, not simply whether here or back home, not simply to argue and work for their political positions. I mean, it's very good if you are supportive of Israel or the Palestinians to go to Capitol Hill and lobby for that. But also in the process of lobbying, you have also to look at the more global picture. For example, I was surprised at the CMAP conference to hear an Israeli speak about Israel not having any more time. And you would expect that to come from a Palestinian, not from an Israeli. And he started listing all the accomplishments of Israel in her 60th anniversary. And yet he said, in a sense, we have failed because we have not solved the problem with the Palestinians. And therefore, the two-state solution is an option that we should pursue and not stand against. And we should help the Israelis to come to that understanding. And I like what he's saying. What he's saying is that even though you may think that American support for Israel on Capitol Hill and elsewhere is going to guarantee the future of Israel, the future of Israel also lies somewhere else. And if Israel does not do its homework with its Palestinian neighbors, who may not be cooperative, not all of them, but some of them, still Israel will have a problem. So American support in by itself will not bring peace and security to the Israelis. I'm reminded of Merkel's visit to Israel, and all of a sudden, when Angela Merkel came to Israel, she stressed all the time the importance of supporting Israel, standing by Israel, and so on. And all of a sudden, a German journalist friend of mine who interviewed me, a couple of years back, calls me and says, I want your opinion about Angela Merkel's visit. I said, I don't know much. I just, I said, no, come on, say what you have. And I said, basically, my spontaneous gut reaction is that if Angela Merkel is really interested in the welfare and security and future good prospects for Israel, then she has also to consider Israel's neighbors, the Palestinians. And you just cannot do it by putting Israel in this wall and saying, I care for Israel. Okay, you care for Israel, but Israel's future is really passes through a honorable, acceptable peace agreement with the Palestinians. And my future as a Palestinian Christian is there, not in continuous confrontation.
Just want to comment on the gentleman's question with the Haliland Christian Clinical Foundation about the Catholic Church. Since our inception this year, 10 years ago, that bishops are heavily involved in the issue of the Holy Land. And they meet every year in January, they go to the Holy Land and discuss issues, how to support the Christians of the Holy Land. The problem I see here, as I'm Roman Catholic too, that our people, the grassroots of the Catholic Church, are not involved. You know, we are leaving it to the hierarchy. If we involve as Catholics within our church, I think we can make change, because of the records, every bishop, or most of the bishops in the United States, I work with them on almost daily basis, they are ready to move, but they need their people to give them the green light, say, okay, we want to do something like that. But if we keep quiet and just worry about our only spiritual activities, that's fine. But we need to move forward for peace and justice, as most of the Catholic universities they have, or they teach peace and justice. And let's ask our Catholic people, to others who are here, to move this forward and talk to your bishop about it.
Thank you.
Dan Dolan, I'm a retired Foreign Service officer. Do you think there is much popular support for the idea that it's in the long-term interests of peace for there to be a one-state rather than a two-state solution here?
The question is the one-state solution. I think we are having trouble in getting two states. We'll have more trouble in getting one state. It's not possible. I personally think it is just wishful thinking on the part of many. Now, what I think could happen in the long run is that if we get a viable Palestinian state and good neighborly relations with Israel, then in the long run, the borders, the wall will eventually come down. I'm opposed to the wall. Now, I want now the wall to come down, and I think Open Bethlehem is saying that, even though its voice, it's an organization that insists on opening up Bethlehem. And I think that that unless really we get the Palestinians, we get our people to be proud of having their own state institutions and so on, we're not going. You see, the prospects, if you look at the map today of the West Bank, 50% of the land is gone already by Israeli settlers and by Israel saying this part is security, that part is security. If Netanyahu comes to power in Israel, and most likely he may next year, you know, then I think another 20% will go. And the Palestinian state that will appear will be just lotting here and there, cantons here and there, and that's it. And Israel will have 250,000 people just monitoring the Palestinians. And in my opinion, that's a recipe for disaster. So there is need to stress the two-state solution now. And some people make your argument that it's not going to work. But I still think there is still hope that it will work.
Could you talk a little bit about the role that you see the Palestinian Christian and Muslim citizens of Israel. I understand that their rates of voting are quite low. Is that a potential first step toward peace, greater participation by them, getting more Israeli Arabs elected to public office in Israel? Do you see that as...
Well, I'm not an expert on the Israeli scene, so I have to be careful in what I say. The problem, as I see it, is that the Arab citizens of Israel feel that they have not received the equal treatment as the Jewish citizens, at least in general. This is at least what I understand. That doesn't mean that they are not integrated into the Israeli economy, into the Israeli health system, social security, and so on. But still, if you look at some of the websites of Arab Israelis, they will tell you there are disparities in what we are receiving in terms of Arab communities vis-a-vis Jewish communities. Even in a city like Haifa, in northern Israel, which I know quite well because my wife comes from there. I go visit sometimes, and Arab people who work with Jewish colleagues in a law firm or in other enterprises still feel they are not fully Israeli citizens. And these are people who serve in the Israeli justice system, who serve in Israel's various institutions, and they feel that they are outsiders. They are not there, you know, the feeling is not there. And then with this talk about, for example, President Abbas in the last meeting with Olmert said that Prime Minister Olmert proposed to him because they were talking about the free passage between Gaza and the West Bank. And Prime Minister Olmert said, it's 1% of the land of Israel. So I want to get from you 1% from the West Bank land, you know. I trade you 1% for 1%. And then Prime Minister Olmert said to Abbas, how about also trading populations, you know? And Abbas said, no way, you know. Because you see, again, this demographic menace that Israel sees is one of the reasons preventing Israel from saying this is a state for all of its citizens, you know. So this is also a problem. Yeah. Please.
James Foreman is my name. Are the Christian Zionists a factor in this equation in the sense that there's unlimited support for the Israeli government and may indirectly encourage the Israelis to, in turn, encourage the exodus of Christians from the Holy Land?
Well, I don't know if you see, when you talk about Christians' dwindling numbers in the Holy Land, I don't like personally, even though it may be very convenient, to go into ideological argument. I think, for example, 99.9% of Palestinian Christians don't have the same language as Christian Zionists. In fact, they think what Christian Zionists are doing in Israel and Palestine is hurting us. But not in the sense that you explained, but in the sense that it is sending messages to our Muslim compatriots that here the Christians are for Israel doing things that are not acceptable. For example, I just read a resolution to be presented at the United Methodist General Assembly this week by a group that want to resolve that Israel expands its settlements in the West Bank, you know. And the guy who showed me that resolution said it will not pass. But this kind of mentality really goes counter to our expectations of Christians. But it will not lead in and by itself to us as Palestinian Christians leaving. What gets us to leave is when I can't go out of Bethlehem, when I can't do business, when I can't think of prospering, when I see that I don't have any chances for my young people, so I start thinking I want to leave. I'm sure that the Israeli government is not sitting there and saying we want these Christians out, you know, and I'm not defending them. I'm the last person to defend the Israeli government because I'm supposedly in the Palestinian legislature. But at the same time, Israel, by following kind of separation policies, you know, is making it difficult for everybody to move around. One time I argued here in Washington with the unit of religious freedom. I said, listen, Israel on holidays, Christian and Jewish and Muslim holidays, offered open entry to Jerusalem, almost by permission, to Christians by permissions, to Muslim open during Ramadan. And I said, usually they say on radio, on the Israeli radio, anybody over the age for Muslims, anybody over the age of 45 is free to go to the mosque to pray in Jerusalem. Fantastic. So it happens during Ramadan, hundreds of thousands of Muslims eventually make it to the old city. Sometimes if it coincides with Jewish holidays, they can't come in. Because Jewish holidays, you have heightened security and so on, and so they are denied. Now the same happened during our Easter. So Israeli officials distribute over 500 permits to Christians in Bethlehem to enter Jerusalem, and then Purim happens to be at the same time as Easter, and then they say, sorry, we gave you the permit, we are so magnanimous, we gave you the permit, but we are also magnanimous in not letting you in, you know? and so we have a problem. Now I said to some people here, I said, when you give a permit, when the Israelis give a permit to a Palestinian over 45 years of age, and it works, and no bombing takes place, why can't they say, for the next 3 months, we are going to allow all Palestinians over the age of 45 free access to Jerusalem. Not to Israel, to Jerusalem, okay? And if it works, if in the next 3 months things work out, then you bring it down to 40. You bring it down then later to 35. But you know, if you talk to Israeli military people about this, they tell you this guy is stupid, you know, because security. But what is there in security when you know for a fact that people over 45 are not going to carry a suicide bombing? So why don't you do it? And the argument here is that you cannot continue the occupation and say we want to make peace with the Palestinians and continue really with the occupation, you know? Yeah.
Dr. Sabella, could you share with us your experience as a member of the Palestinian legislature in your acquaintance with and work with colleagues who are Hamas supporters, and offer your views on whether supporters of Hamas regard it as an Islamist party designed to promote Islam, or as a Palestinian nationalist party that uses Islam as an attractive way of enhancing its role in Palestinian politics.
Well, first of all, I think on a personal level, dealing with the Hamas members, particularly in the West Bank, have been more or less a pleasant experience, even though we disagree completely with them, you know. But we have, for example, I have worked with them in the Committee on Jerusalem. on the legal committee of the PLC when we were operating. Now we are not operating. And they were really, some of them were really very, very open and understanding in the West Bank. Now, the more you move towards Gaza, and the more southern you get in Gaza, the more close-minded you find some of the Hamas members. Now, the problem with Hamas, in my viewpoint, is that it's not a nationalist movement. It is an Islamist movement. And one member of the parliament, Palestinian parliament, one Hamas member of the Palestinian parliament, and I remember this very clearly, said one time in one of the debates that it is the law of God which is the highest law and the better one than any other law. And to me, as a secularist, I find it very difficult to accept. It's not that I'm opposed to the law of God, but I want to be a citizen equally treated. And what worries me about Hamas is really that eventually it is going to come with a strictly Islamic interpretation of the Sharia and imposing it on the society. My experience with Fatah is that it is a secular group, it is an open group, it is not religiously oriented. Recently we were receiving a delegation in the parliament, Palestinian parliament, from Turkey, the Islamic and the Reform and Justice Party in Turkey, I think, which is supposed to be an Islamist party. And one of my colleagues in Fatah was telling the chief of the delegation that you are an Islamist party. And the answer was, no, we are not an Islamist party. We are a party with many conservatives among our leadership. But we are not an Islamist party. And what we have hoped for, some of us in Palestine, is that Hamas may take on the Turkish model, in a sense to be, okay, Islamist, yet cognizant of the realities of life. But I am not that optimistic that this will happen. And that is why I'm also concerned about people here who try to give a lot of excuses for Hamas. And this reminds me of the PLO debates in the 70s, and in a sense, in preparation for a Hamas takeover of the West Bank and Gaza. I'm not comfortable with that. On a personal level, they may be wonderful people, and I follow up the news from Gaza when there are sometimes problems, and Hamas leaderships are very forthcoming, very supportive on an individual level, and sometimes on an institutional level as well for the Christian community there. So I'm not worried about this. My worry is about what kind of a vision Hamas will bring to Palestinian society, and therefore I'm very clear about it, and I say let's not fall into the trap of encouraging Hamas to take over. I think we should do everything possible to support Abbas and Fayyad, even though even internally we have disagreements with them. But I think it is very important to support them, because the alternative is really to have a vacuum, to have a political, and that's why we are also frustrated with the Israeli military, really, because the Israeli military hasn't been cooperating with improving the conditions of life. And therefore, this gets to more frustration, and in a sense, it leads to less credibility to Abbas and Fayyad. So, yeah.
Robert Angus, follow up on that comment of yours. What about, what do you think about the recent visit of Jimmy Carter to meet with the Hamas leader in Syria.
Damascus, yeah. I think it's okay. I think in principle it is okay, but it should not be used to promote Hamas as alternative to the national authority, which I think may be happening even among some Israeli circles. But for Israel to support Abbas and Fayyad, they need to act also. For example, if there is no agreement by the end of the year, I think the secularist, pragmatic, nationalist movement in Palestine is finished. Even if Marwan Barghouti comes out of shape, he's not the last hope for all of us. For some of us, he is. And I'm not discounting his role, his possible role. But what I'm also saying, that unless there is really a comprehensive agreement, we are in deep trouble, even if Marwan Barghouti comes out. And this is what we have been telling the delegations, what we have been telling Israelis. And we are saying, you know, you are helping Hamas by not coming forth and doing things. Yeah, please.
Richard Parker, former Vice Consul in Jerusalem. Are the Israelis respecting the status quo of the holy place?
The status quo of the holy places? Yes. For most of the things, yes. There are sometimes infractions, but these infractions are not carried out by official Israelis. They are carried out by by ultra-religious, fanatic people. But for most of the part, yes. We have a problem though with the Israelis in that they haven't been forthcoming with visa to clergy. In other words, clergy who are coming especially from the Arab world to serve in Palestine and Israel have been having very much difficulty in getting their visas. And this is a problem. And sometimes if they are given a visa, they are given a visa for 2-3 months and then revoked, and then you have to go out and so on. I mean, these little things can make a world of difference. And the Israelis are not doing it. In terms of whether Israel is respecting the status quo of holy places, we have a problem in the old city of Jerusalem, where the Israeli settler movement, some say with the encouragement of the Israeli government, want to take as many homes and properties as possible. In order not to allow for any future redivision of Jerusalem. And so far, the Israelis have had almost 70 properties inside the old city. And now there is a big threat of two main hotels in Jaffa Gate to be taken over by the settlers. So this is concern for us because, in a sense, it will lead to seeing the Israelis as strictly interested in taking over the old city of Jerusalem, and it creates problems. Please,
hi, my name is Adam Pugo. I'm a student in the Center for Contemporary Studies here. And my question is this. You've stressed the need to come to a comprehensive agreement with Israel by the end of the year.
Yeah.
Yet, my question is, how can you trust Israel as a negotiating partner when they seem to use the entire peace process as sort of a front which would they can stall for time and expand their settlements and impose their apartheid system? And also, I understand that you don't agree politically with Hamas, but I mean, do you think that a comprehensive agreement is possible without them on board?
No, I don't think so. And that's why I think what President Carter did was good. And Hamas needs to climb down from its high tree. And, they need really to start talking. They need to start talking to the Israelis. And I'm not, don't misunderstand me, I'm not saying Israel is, is really forthcoming, generous, magnanimous, use all the kind words about Israel. No, we have serious problems with the Israelis. We have serious problems that are, you know, you can sense that when you talk, for example, to President Abbas. Even though he is very diplomatic, and somebody said he has excellent chemistry with Olmert, still he feels nothing is moving. And some people say, but maybe the 10, 12 negotiating teams are going somewhere. I don't think so. And therefore, the frustration we have is that the Israelis, and sometimes I say it and people disagree with me, Israel does not have a vision for peace. Israel simply has a vision for security. And this is also the mistake of Oslo. You didn't make peace between Palestinians and Israelis. You made peace on the security ground of Israel. I mean, you worried too much about Israel's security, and in the end, you lost the peace process. And then Israeli politicians internally use also the peace process to really hijack it for their own petty reasons, you know. And therefore you end up really not having a peace. And this is very frustrating. And it's so frustrating that today, when you go in Ramallah or East Jerusalem, and people stopped asking about the politics, because they know there is no way out. And now, if there is no way out, I've been thinking that maybe one way out is to think of ways in which the Palestinian economy can be culture, society, can be, you know, encouraged to grow and to develop, and to make sure that we don't get the Israelis to intervene in that directly, you know. In other words, we should think of alternative solutions that have nothing to do with Israel and Israeli decision making. Because every time you come to the Israelis and Israeli decision making, they torpedo the whole thing. In the name of security, in the name of that, in the name of this, we cannot do it, it's not possible. For example, the Americans tried so hard at a certain point to lift roadblocks, checkpoints. And Barack one time came back and said, not even a single checkpoint. And you know, what do you mean not even a single checkpoint, you know? And then you go and build 60 checkpoints, new checkpoints, and then next week you just remove them. Very good. So what does this all do? You talk about Bethlehem, you know. Really, economic strangulation. The one good thing about Bethlehem is that we are getting tourists and pilgrims. And the Israelis are cooperating on that. I'm not saying no. But we need the Israelis to do this in more places. We need them to open up and not to be always so concerned, rightly or wrongly, about security. Now, in Qalqilia, which is a town a little bit in the northwestern West Bank, you know, if you look at the wall surrounding Qalqilia, a town of 30,000, 35,000, they have absolutely no way in or out except the checkpoint. And they are separated from their lands, agricultural lands. So, and Israeli authorities have not allowed Arab Israelis to come and do their shopping in Qalqilia. And when we asked why not, they said simply because of security concerns, you know. And imagine if I get every week, every Friday or Saturday, if I get, let's say, 2,000 or 3,000 Arab Israelis into Qalqilia. That would move the economy. That would be good for Abbas. That would be good for Fayyad. These are your partners, you Israelis, you know. If you don't want to work with them, then with whom would you want to work? You prefer to work with Haniya and Zahar? Okay, maybe you'll get them. But that is not, and that is frustrating, you see. So I agree with you. Yes. A lady?
You spoke earlier of secularism, and I was wondering what your thoughts are on the possibility of an emerging Palestinian state being a secular state, and if that is not a possibility, what the place of Christians would be under a Muslim government?
Well, most likely an emerging Palestinian state, if the beginnings happen this year, would be a secular state, most likely. But as the gentleman said, we cannot discount Hamas as a political group. It's there. We cannot say, no, we don't want Hamas. It's there. Now, if Hamas, if we have a Palestinian state, where would the non-Muslims stand, or what would be the future? Now, I have read the platform of Hamas. I've gone through the basic law of the national authority. And the difference between the two is that in the national authority basic law, the Sharia, the Islamic law, is a principal source of legislation. In the Hamas platform, the Sharia is the principal source of legislation. Which means that in both cases, you are going to continue to have Islamic influence, the influence of Islamic laws, regulations. But in the Hamas case, you know, you are going to have all laws influenced by Islam. I mean, the example of Jordan is a very good example, whereby you have a combination of Islam being a major religious source, a judicial source, and you have civil law. So the combination of two makes everybody comfortable in Jordan. Now, in Palestine, the model of the national authority is more like the Jordanian model. The Hamas model, if Hamas takes over, will be more like, I would say it's more strictly religious model. Some in Israel, unfortunately, think, this is good, because then if the Palestinians have an Islamic state, then we can say, why don't we have also an exclusive state, and therefore we can exchange populations on religious basis. Now, I think it's too simplistic, and it will invite disaster in the future. Okay? Somebody? Yeah, please.
Yeah. You had said earlier that time, I think I understood you to say, time does not appear to be on the Israeli side. They should act now to have some sort of accommodation. But it seems to me that during these 60 years, the status quo has been very beneficial to Israel. And the longer that continues, it seems to me, the greater the opportunities for Israel to increase not only its territory, but its control, and have the Palestinians lead until all of Palestine becomes an Israeli state. It seems to me that that would be ideal for them. Let this go on for another 60 years. So it seems to me that the alternatives would be either to have the United States withdraw its strong support for Israel, which is not likely, because even Hillary Clinton the other day said, well, if Iran, Ahmadinejad, attacks Israel, we will use nuclear weapons to defend Israel. Or the other alternative, perhaps, is if the Muslim states can get together and all of them attack Israel, which also seems unlikely because there doesn't appear to be enough convergence of attitude with regard to Palestinians. Most Muslims I've met all over the world really are not that preoccupied with the Palestinian problem.
Well, I think this question is a good question on which to end my lecture or my intervention. In the conference of CMAP, I heard someone say that the Palestinian issue is really no longer that important strategically. So we have become less and less of importance in terms of U.S. strategic interests. So U.S. has Iraq now, they have the problems with Iran, they have the alliances with the Arab Gulf states, and so on. But I would say that when an Israeli says that we don't have time, imagine that Israel in a couple of years, 3-4 years, will have to go to war again. Whether with Iran, whether with Hezbollah, whether with Syria, we'll smash them, okay, but we'll lose 2,000 of its children again. You are going through the cycle of war. Okay, even if your scenario is realistic, which I hope it is not, the Palestinians will not leave. So the problem facing Israel in the long run is if I'm going to keep control of the Palestinians, what does that do to me as a state? Number one. And even if I can live with that on moral, religious, ethical, whatever ground, okay? Today, Israel has relations with almost 14 Arab countries, over the table, under the table. Israel has strategic interests with Arab countries who work with Israel under the table, but don't agree 100% or even 50% with what Israel is doing in the occupied territories. One statesman here from Washington one time traveled to Malaysia to speak to the government there, and President Bush asked her to go as ambassador of goodwill, and when she came back, she reported to President Bush that the #1 issue in Malaysia, which is about maybe 10,000 miles away from Palestine, Israel, was Palestine. So it is in the national interest of Israel, the US, to really work on resolving the issue. If the issue is not resolved, it can come back and hurt Israel in so many different ways. And this is where I think this Israeli guy who said that Israel does not have much time, is at least pointing to that it may be really problematic for Israel in the future.
Thank you, Dr. Sabella, for this brilliant performance. I think you have enlightened all of us with your firsthand experience and your insight, and we're very grateful to you. Thank you.